So, two pieces of news came out of the UK this past week that made me angry just looking at the headline. The first was about trans girls being banned from joining Girl Guiding, and the second about how the Women's Institute would no longer be accepting trans women as members from April 2026. In both stories, which came out one day after the other, the leaders at both organisations lay the blame for their decision at the feet of the Supreme Court, which earlier this year ruled that sex, as stated in the Equality Act of 2010, refers to biological sex. That's the sex that you're born with, therefore rendering a gender recognition certificate essentially meaningless and ensuring that trans people, well, trans women, because that's the real target, but we'll get into that later, are excluded from certain organisations and services, allowing many, if not all of those doing the excluding, to pretend it's all about legality and not the small-minded, mean-spirited bigotry of miserable fucks already predisposed to making life horrible for anybody that they don't like. Now, I'm not saying that this kind of narrow-mindedness drove the choices made by the Girl Guiding Board of Trustees or the executive of the National Federation of Women's Institutes, who both went out of their way to express sadness that these bans had to be put into place and to declare both their belief that transgender women are women and their support for inclusivity. The fault here is with the lack of clarity about how to apply the Supreme Court's decision, which the UK government is still trying to work out itself. Meanwhile, transgender people have been dropped into a legal limbo, easy prey for bigots who love a bit of persecution, and primo frig material for J.K. Rowling, who toasted the Supreme Court ruling with her customary display of smug self-satisfaction and petty spite, no doubt before signing off to get off by shoving a fat cigar up her biologically approved jerky sock. But Rowling is typical of the transphobic crowd, always ready to use pseudo-intellectual bullshit like gender-critical feminism as an excuse to pick on vulnerable minorities, and to pretend that what it's really all about is protecting women, just like Tommy Robinson, when he leads a bunch of sex pests to scream abuse and threats at psychologically damaged refugees shoved into asylum hotels. Still, you can't deny it's an effective focus, that protection of women. Now, I get that there is absolutely an argument and a very serious discussion to be had about the trauma of women who have suffered domestic and sexual violence by men, and who, understandably, cannot trust men and don't want to be around them. These are women who are used to such men wearing masks, pretending to be something they are not, so it's no big jump to see why they might consider transgender women just another mask. Whatever we feel about it, their experiences and trauma need to be understood and respected by everyone. However, that trauma is most definitely not respected by those only too ready to co-opt and take advantage of it as a tool for their own bigotry. And it is bigotry, you can tell, because of its rational inconsistency and the kind of shit-headed fuckwhippets that go in for it. In this case, the game is pretty much given away by transphobia's obsessive and almost exclusive focus on transgender women. You hardly ever hear anything about transgender men, except for how Elliot Page made Umbrella Academy confusing by being exactly the same character with a different haircut. No, it's always transgender women and bathrooms. Transgender women and bathrooms. Transphobes and the far right, not always one and the same, but pretty often, in a depressingly swastika-shaped example of intersectionality, are absolutely mad about bathrooms. They can't stop going on about them. They're like a bunch of really obnoxious kids around a campfire, trembling in nervous excitement as their troop leader tells horror stories about sex offenders dressed as women lying in wait inside women's toilets. When transphobic pundits recount the same apocryphal stories on news channels desperate for engagement, it's always with a delicious sense of pleasure, like they're getting off on thinking about it, almost as if they kind of like the idea of cosplay rape. But transgender women are not going into bathrooms to commit assault. They're going in there to take a piss. Or do something else the far right doesn't like to think about, unless it involves another person and a cup. The entire bathroom issue is a massive nothing burger, a prurient scary story, centred on a place that acts as the perfect shorthand for both female intimacy and female vulnerability. After all, are you ever more exposed than when your knickers are around your ankles? And if it's not about predatory lurking, then it's about men finding ever new inventive ways of invading women's spaces. Because yeah, what man hasn't considered years of physically and emotionally traumatic social, medical and legal transitioning just to hang out in a woman's bathroom? It's what hormone therapy and surgery were invented for. It's almost a weird bit of magical thinking connected to an idea that posits men, not content with having all the advantages a patriarchal system has to offer, now want to occupy all women's places and roles too. It's an odd conclusion to arrive at, that men look at how women are treated in society and jealously think, hey, I want to be underpaid, undervalued, and constantly sidelined and ignored too. But obviously, it's not about any of that. It's just about exercising control over people, about policing them, and the smaller and more defenseless the group, the better. So, of course, far right and authoritarian regimes want to police transgender women. And in this case, not just because they're an easy target for bullying, but also because, brilliantly, policing transgender women means policing all women. And isn't that the dream of macho far-right movements everywhere? You can essentially go around and accuse any woman of being transgender and then demand proof. Show us your fanny, love. You can't piss in here if your fanny doesn't look right to me. Can you imagine men, famously for the most part unable to point to the clitoris, let alone tell you what it's for, parading as experts on what counts as a proper fanny? Fuck off. And you know they won't be standing in front of men's bathrooms demanding proof of gender. These red-blooded defenders of the faith, they don't want to be looking at cocks all day. Well, apart from the ones they see in the mirror every time they walk past. Because looking at penises, it's icky and gay. I think this compulsion to fixate specifically on transgender women is down to the fact that we still live in a fully patriarchal society. In a world that continues to be designed for men and dominated by the male viewpoint, transgender women are the ultimate transgressors. They have committed the cardinal sin of turning their backs on the greatest gift God ever bestowed upon humanity: manhood. In some cases, even going so far as to have that manhood surgically inverted.
This Halloween, coming to a cinema near you. Prepare to be terrified out of your gender with Rob Zombie's vaginoplasty.
No, you should get down on your knees every day and give thanks to the heavens that you're a man. That's probably another reason why you don't hear that much about transgender men, because at some level the patriarchy is like, yeah, of course you want to be a man. Men are just the best. We totally get it. On some subconscious level, they must take it as a compliment. Wanting to be a man is the affirmation of everything the patriarchy believes about its own supremacy. It has to be one of the biggest ironies of transphobia that all these little pricks turn out to be such massive cunts. And so transgender women have to be punished. Their lives have to be made miserable, as if being part of an already vilified minority wasn't hard enough. They must be banned from certain spaces and organisations because of who they are, told they cannot go to the toilet unless they conform to an identity imposed upon them by the state. They aren't allowed to participate in sports because of their unfair biological advantage. A belief that both ignores the effects of hormone treatments on any presumed advantage and assumes that the only reason that anyone would want to take part in a sporting activity is to win. And I guess also transgender people pose a direct threat to the this or that binary simplicity required of modern political orthodoxy to polarize and silo sections of society in order to maintain power over the whole. Transgender men and women are the ultimate shade of grey, a massive complication for governments who hate nuance, and why unprincipled, valueless political automata like Keir Starmer are happy to sit back while a statutory judiciary body interprets trans peoples out of the public sphere and ensures little trans kids are kicked out of the Girl Guides. Yes, much better to pretend they don't exist, or to make them too scared to show themselves, or equally, to oblige organisations like the Women's Institute to prohibit trans membership or participation for fear of being taken to court by some embittered TERF with a pathological inferiority complex and an axe to grind. But trans people do exist, and these miserable attempts at cultural apartheid must fail. But that will only happen if we refuse to remain silent. Closing doors to people because of who they are is discrimination, no matter how a legal clause is worded. Sex is not binary. Gender is not binary, not even biologically. But demonizing and ostracizing someone because of their gender, because of their identity, that is singularly shitty and ultimately self-destructive. Because trans rights are human rights. And when you open the door to the persecution of one, you open the door to the persecution of many. And that includes yourself. Either you live in a free society or you don't. That is the binary choice.